Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Finnegan. I'm the Water Project Manager at the Local Government Commission, and I want to welcome you all to this morning's summit, Ensuring Equitable Involvement in Regional Water Management. How far we've come, but we are far from done. Throughout the next 3 days, our speakers and participants will be sharing lessons learned from the Integrated Regional Water Management, Disadvantaged Communities, and Tribal Involvement Program, and point us towards how we can continue advancing tribal and marginalized community engagement moving forward. I want to start off by thanking our summit sponsor, the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority, and the incredible Summit Advisory Committee that's been working since June to put together this event. We appreciate your dedication and time, and you can find the list of our advisory committee members on our summit website. To save on time, we won't be sharing our speaker bios today, although they are very impressive, but we encourage you to review them under the speakers tab of the attendee packet. All sessions will be recorded in English and in Spanish and shared for distribution following the event. I should also note that everyone will be muted without their video turned on until our breakout group small discussions at the end of today. So let's start the day by typing into the chat, if you have not already, where you're joining from and what agency you represent. And while you are all doing that, I want to introduce our wonderful MC for today's event, Anecita Agustinez, the Department of Water Resources Tribal Policy Advisor. With that, I'll let Anecita take it from here.
Good morning. Yate Abine. It's my honor to serve as your MC for this summit. And before we start today, I would like to acknowledge the first inhabitants of this land. And since I am at the confluence of the Sacramento and American rivers, I honor the Miwoks, the Maidu, the Nishinan, the Patwin, and the Northern Yokuts. Thank you for this honor to speak on your land. I would also like to take this opportunity to offer continued blessings to each of you and to your families and to all who have been affected by the fires, and to the first responders and their families, our continued prayers of support and gratitude for everything you do for our well-being. Ahehe. As MC of the 2020 Virtual Summit, welcome to day one. Our discussions will cover ensuring equitable involvement in regional water planning. I also wish to thank our sponsors and our planning committee for designing a really great program and for the thoughtful selection of our world-class speakers. Each of you bring incredible perspectives, which we are all looking forward to hearing. And finally, I wish to acknowledge our audience and thank you for your dedication and support of integrated regional water management and the challenges we face to ensure equity, engagement, and involvement. So let's briefly review today's agenda, which you should also be receiving shortly in the chat. The agenda was also sent with your summit reminder email. The morning will begin with a series of open remarks from the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority, who is our sponsor for today's summit, and we'll hear from state leaders. We'll then hear lessons learned from a panel of practitioners who've been engaging tribes and marginalized communities through the Integrated Regional Water Management Program from over a decade. Following that, we'll have a brief break, and then we'll return to a panel with DWR staffs, the IRWM region Roundtable of Regions, and a community representative to share more about the future of IRWM in the face of COVID-19, climate change, economic uncertainty, and the movement for racial justice. Finally, attendees will break into smaller groups and we'll dive into findings from the DWR interim needs assessment, and we'll use that needs assessment to help us identify priorities, regional case studies, and additional recommendations. So you'll be directed to smaller group sessions that will be facilitated with note takers, and we're really looking forward to that discussion. So let's start off our first speaker. I'd like to introduce Rich Holler, the General Manager of the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority. Rich?
Good morning. Thank you, Anecita. I'm Rich Holler, broadcasting live from Southwest Studio 1 in Riverside, where this morning we have a very light mist with a hint of rain, so that's very exciting. We refer to our offices no longer, we're actually in studios since we're so much on video chats. On behalf of the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority Commission and the Santa Ana Region IRWM Steering Committee, I'd like to welcome you to the summit. We are proud to be a sponsor of this 3-half-day event, and why not? Have you seen this? The all-star panelists contained in the program. It's going to be a super event, and we're very, very excited. This event is about sharing our experiences across the state. And I'm hoping to learn a lot about what is working well with things that can be improved upon. I encourage our speakers to discuss the good and the bad based upon their experiences. SAPA has certainly learned a lot through implementation of its programs, such as how to check the quality, translation services, and how do you provide training for elected and government officials, public education programs, and technical assistance for 23 projects concurrently. Finally, I'd like to thank the Department of Water Resources for providing the vision and leadership for this event. Thanks to the speakers and all of you for your interest in this very, very important topic. Once again, welcome, and I return you now to Anecita for the introduction of our next speaker.
Rich, and thank you, SAPA, for sponsoring this wonderful event. At this time, I'm so excited to ask to join our stage Secretary Wade Crowfoot. He is the Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency. Wade?
Anecita, thanks so much, and great to be with you all here today virtually. Big thanks first to Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority. When we think about visionary regionalized water planning in California, Santa Ana is top of the list. I know this from being educated by my good friend Celeste Cantu that many years ago. And Santa Ana has really led the way in demonstrating how agencies across a watershed can actually come together for the sustainability of the watershed. So excited always to join for these events organized by the authority. Also, big thanks to LGC, the Local Government Commission, the hub of visionary thinking in local government, and really glad they're part of this as well. 2020 has obviously been a very tough year and continues to unfold. Most of us are working from home. Many of us are taking care of school-age kids or parents. All of us are contending with the very real threat of a deadly virus. On top of that, it's been a challenging summer. We've seen record-shattering temperatures across the state, both Southern and Northern California, driving what have been horrific wildfire conditions. Over 4 million acres of the state have burned this fire season. We know that there are communities and tens of thousands of people across the state that have been evacuated or lost their homes. So as Anecita said, our thoughts go out to them. We also know that wildfires, and these catastrophic wildfires particularly, create major challenges to our watersheds across the state where those fires occurred. And we are focused on working with local governments and water agencies to ensure that those wildfires don't create public safety and health hazards this winter. At the same time, I think we all acknowledge, based on all of the scientific evidence that exists, that global warming and climate change is exacerbating some very natural threats we face in California: wildfire, drought, flooding, extreme heat, and of course, sea level rise and coastal erosion. And we are talking today, obviously, about in the water space, and not only are wildfires potentially impacting our watersheds, both the natural environment and reliability for communities, but we're coming off a dry winter in the last year's or this past year water year, and we very much hope we get significant rain this year. But we know major drought is just around the corner, as are flooding emergencies. So amidst all of those challenges, huge thanks for doing what you do and not being so distracted by the situational uncertainty of our times that you're not focused on the future, and you very much are, and that's what today is about. Today, I think, in this discussion that's unfolding over the next few days are about two key priorities of the Newsom administration. Certainly climate resilience and water resilience, and equity and inclusion. So I'm happy to just frame some high-level thoughts as you kick things off today. Obviously, on the topic of water resilience, the Newsom administration issued a water resilience portfolio earlier in the year. I think one of the primary takeaways was achieving more water reliability for all communities and restoring and maintaining our natural environment is a regional challenge. the resilience challenges that the North Coast faces are very different than those in Southeast California, in the Imperial and Riverside counties. The coastal water agencies and communities face very different challenges than communities in the Central Valley or even in the Sierra foothills or mountains. So we are in California truly a water system of systems. And the answer to building our water resilience isn't found in Sacramento. And so this water resilience portfolio is all about providing state support for regional leadership and regional planning. And so that's why it's so important, the work that you all are doing in the integrated regional water management planning, the IRWM, that is really at this point, I think, almost 20 years old. The initial legislation passed in 2002, 48 IRWMs across the state, over 1,300 multi-benefit projects that are regional in nature within those watersheds that have been partnerships of the state and the local government. And so we want to do all that we can through our Department of Water Resources and our other state agencies to support this regional planning. You all represent in some ways a coalition of the willing. Our legal constructs for water don't require this collaborative, intense regional watershed scale planning, but certainly we know it's the answer. We know our water resources exist on a regional basis. And so very thankful that you continue to drive forward on IRWM. I'm also excited that yesterday the governor announced the importance of nature-based solutions to both our climate challenge and the challenge of maintaining our biodiversity. You all know that our watersheds are actually perhaps the most important water infrastructure that we have. Most of the water from most of California begins in the Sierra Nevada mountains in forested watersheds and continues through natural river systems and floodplains, and ultimately to be used by folks across California. And we know that investment in infrastructure, regional investment in water reliability requires investing in those nature-based solutions and really coming back to actually utilizing nature for multiple benefits. So really excited about the role of nature-based solutions in your regional planning and your regional climate resilience work. Other key priority, obviously, center of today and this week's discussion that you're having is equity and inclusion. Governor Newsom talks publicly and frankly a lot privately about everything we do needs to build a California for all. We are the 5th largest economy in the world, and we can take pride in that and in that prosperity, but we recognize there are huge inequities among Californians, and many of those inequities are moving in the wrong direction. And so we need to ensure that we are integrating a priority towards reducing inequities, building equity, including all Californians, all communities in decision-making moving forward. And that's challenging. Part of the real reflection and reckoning of 2020, given the protests against racial inequity, racial injustice, racial violence, is that we inherit systems that have inequity built into them. In other words, this is systematic or systemic inequity and systemic racism. And we have to acknowledge that. And that is certainly present in the systems we operate in water. And acknowledging that is okay and actually essential to move forward to institutionalize a more just, equitable, and inclusive structure moving forward. We know that inequity exists in our water systems in the state that have manifested from many communities in our state living for years, decades, with unreliable water supply or water supply that are toxic to the families that those water systems operate. That's a reality, and that's a reality that we need to face. The good news is state and local governments are rolling up sleeves and tackling that challenge together, frankly, at the insistence and from the leadership of the communities impacted by those inequities. And so our Safe and Affordable Water Act that you no doubt will talk about some today and this week are part of our solution. But it goes much beyond that. And frankly, what we need to do in each region of the state is recognize those communities, those water users that have not had a voice, and give them a voice, and then take time to listen and learn about their concerns, the challenges that they face in this water sector, and then working to build solutions that include them and address their concerns. Now, this will take time, and this will move at the speed of trust. That's a sentence the governor used in his announcement of an executive order yesterday, the speed of trust. This is not about identifying quickly shovel-ready projects that address systemic inequity and then moving forward on them. I'm just as excited as other people are in getting real projects done. But this is a different type of conversation, I think. This requires leaders, those in power in water systems across the state, to really bring together folks that have not had power and voice in regional water planning, and then listen to them and learn and work with them to actually integrate their perspectives, their concern, their voices into regional water planning moving forward. So this is tough work. It's work that takes time, but it's essential work if we are going to build our climate resilience, our water reliability for all Californians, and if we are going to really live up to the values of our state as it relates to equity and inclusion. So I'm so thankful of the work that you all are doing. I'm really glad this conversation has come together. I wanted to be here to at least let you know how much of a priority it is for our agency and Governor Newsom's administration. And I'm hoping that this discussion will identify ways that state government and state agencies can support building equity and inclusion in this essential regional water management and regional water planning. And Anecita and team, thanks so much, and I wish you all the best for the next few days.
Thank you, Wade. Really appreciate those words and reminding us and our audience about the complexity and the dynamics involved in our water structure, our watershed, and what we have to do with our various agencies and departments. And we can't do this without our audience, without the practitioners, and without the communities that each of the practitioners work with. So thank you so much for that. It's always an honor to hear you speak and know the work that you do at Natural Resources agencies for all of California. So I really do appreciate that. And now I'd like to transition to hear an opening plenary from another amazing individual in the water world. And I'd like to welcome Laurel Firestone, our State Water Board member.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here and help kick off this event to reflect on and renew our commitment to ensuring equitable involvement in regional water planning here in California. As Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, this governor and those of us that serve in his administration have, from the very first days in office, focused on the responsibility and urgent call to make sure that we're building a California that works for all. This doesn't just happen with a new tagline or logo. This happens by really hard, deliberate work at every level of our government, and most importantly, by leadership at the local level to drive, guide, and implement this promise. So today, as we're reeling from fires, the pandemic, polarized political institutions, racial violence, and injustices that feel visibly and concrete and personal in our daily lives more than ever before. It's more clear than ever that existing disparities, structural and cultural oppression, and climate change are resulting in loss of lives, in huge economic costs, and human suffering. Water is at the core of building a California that works for all. In fact, water is our most basic need. It touches everything we do, It's intimate. We bring it into our homes and into our bodies. It nourishes everyone that we love. It's powerful. Access to water has been one of the most powerful drivers in our ability to create wealth, build economic development, housing, and grow food. And water can be destructive with floods and sea level rise and contamination. We've seen devastating impacts and will continue to see more and more. So we all come into this work from our own experiences. And I wanted to start with giving you a little background on the experiences and work that has shaped how I view the state's role in making a California for all within the water context, and has informed my role as a member of the State Water Resources Control Board. When I first started my career as a young attorney, I moved to the San Joaquin Valley to provide legal services to address water challenges in and with rural, low-income, primarily farm worker communities. It was there that I first met and worked with Susana de Anda, an amazingly gifted organizer who's now the co-founder and executive director of Community Water Center, an environmental justice nonprofit organization. So one of the first calls that we got was from a mother in the town of Decorah, whose water in her home and in her children's school was coming out brown and smelled like sewage. The local water board not only provided no information, but canceled all regular public meetings. And when they did hold a meeting, the leaders dismissed community concerns, saying that the brown water is just how it is, and it was fine for coffee, stop complaining. So we partnered with this group of local moms to organize others in their community and navigate who to call to request oversight and accountability. So it turns out the water system's wells had become contaminated with nitrate, that they drilled a new well that was deeper, and in that they hit manganese and hydrogen sulfide. But after some investigation by the state, it was found that the real issue of why it was coming out brown and smelling like sewage was that the maintenance and operation of the system was improper to deal with those contaminants. They weren't flushing and cleaning and chlorinating the system correctly, and no one had been enforcing the need to do so. So this pattern is not unique. We have all seen how oftentimes our biggest challenges are about needing changes in how people do their job, how organizations and agencies are structured, and how we invest in areas that have been ignored, disenfranchised, or disinvested in for decades, if not generations. So I highlight this because it was my first lesson that even the most tangible and visible water challenges, this water coming out brown, were fundamentally a people problem, meaning a human challenge that can't just be solved through engineering and technology. So as a member of the California State Water Resources Control Board, I've met communities facing a myriad of acute water challenges throughout the state, from widespread contamination of our water sources to dilapidated pipes and lack of basic water infrastructure, to losing access to water at all through overuse of our limited water in our aquifers and rivers and streams. And those impacts are not felt equally. Our most vulnerable communities are hit the hardest. For our hardest working families, in many areas, it feels like the structures to address water challenges seem built to fail. And now those existing realities are becoming exacerbated by climate change, rising income and wealth inequality, and increasingly segmented and polarized governance structures and political institutions. Today, as a state water board member, it's even more evident to me that what's needed to address our water challenges in this state are human solutions, which require us, not just technology to solve, And those human solutions require just as real investment. What we have the opportunity to focus on today and over the course of this convening is how we foster those human solutions that we need to build a California that works for all. Fundamentally, the solutions start with creating a table that is truly inclusive and representative of all communities that are impacted by water management and water decision-making. So the Prop 1 Disadvantaged Communities and Tribal Involvement Program was really the first attempt at setting aside exclusive funding targeted at engaging and involving tribes and marginalized communities in regional water planning. So now we're asking, how successful was it? Did it meaningfully improve relationship building to uncover and address community water needs? Did it result in a place at the decision-making table for all marginalized communities to help drive water decision-making locally and regionally? And did it effectively result in equitable management of our water resources? And certainly we know it didn't fully accomplish all of those things. But what we're asking to think about today is reflecting on what progress we have made and what we can learn to point us towards progress on achieving these goals. Today, we recognize that water management decision-making is happening at many levels through local agencies, regional management agencies, and state agencies like the ones here today. So as we focus on progress towards addressing inequality and making sure that water management in California is helping to build a California for all, we're also looking at a more expansive and nuanced view of the spaces that need to be inclusive and effectively engaging tribes and marginalized communities. So whether it's at the local level with water planning and management decisions, or at the regional level through integrated regional water management planning groups, groundwater sustainability agencies, or water quality management agencies. Regional water planning is an opportunity to bring water users from throughout a region together and look at the realities of water vulnerability and sustainability square in the face and examine how the region can best manage our extremely limited water resources. But as always, if communities are not represented in those discussions, if their needs are not even identified and the impacts on them directly analyzed, then we will almost certainly just perpetuate and frankly likely exacerbate the inequalities that we experience today. I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the State Water Resources Control Board's new SAFER program. So this is yet another space that water decision-making is, water decisions are being made. So last year, Governor Newsom signed SB 200, as Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, into law to help realize the human right to water, to ensure that all Californians can access safe, clean, and affordable water. So we call this program at the State Water Board SAFER, which stands for Safe and Affordable Funding for Equity and Resilience. And what this program allows us to do is pull together all our resources and tools, work with local and regional partners, and proactively develop drinking water solutions that meet the needs of communities that have gone far too long without it. And to enable us to do that effectively, we've invested in our Office of Public Participation and in engagement units, and provided unprecedented resources to technical assistance providers and community engagement on the ground. And we've established a diverse and inclusive SAFER advisory committee to help us guide the development of this program. And there will be a panel discussing integration of these efforts with that program later in the convening. So while we're very much a work in progress, we're striving to be led by the principles that we're discussing here today. And what we're here to do today, and what all of you have been working to do throughout your work, is to do just that: ensure equitable involvement in regional water planning and decision-making. Because at the core, we're all interconnected. Even if our pipes, funding, and institutional boundaries are separate and fragmented, whether it's drinking water or any other water challenge that we face, we need to look beyond the fragmentation that divides us and develop solutions together if we're going to be successful in addressing our most critical water challenges. As they say, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. Our state will not get far if we're each going at it alone. Thank you for each of your work and for taking the time to come together in this space to reflect and learn and renew our commitment to ensuring equitable involvement in regional water planning here in California.
Thank you so much, Laura, for those words. And I do wanted to, you mentioned if, Trayvon, if you wouldn't mind to keep Laurel on camera, I'd really like to acknowledge, Laura, what you mentioned about the convenings. And I think that's something that we had a tab on our website here about the prior convenings. And I think we've got a few minutes, and you know, the convenings, such as what we're doing today, really falls on the great work that the community has done. I mean, as state agency representatives, and you had that life before becoming a board member, and you were a part of that process. And I really want to acknowledge, you know, in this additional time we have, the convenings in 2005. And that was a groundbreaking opportunity for the community to sit down with state agency folks and be in an environment where no one could leave for 3 days and come up with recommendations, basically. You know, and they say, put everyone in the room and you will find some solutions. I don't know if you recall that, but if you could speak to that and how that then really informed Proposition 1 and what we did with water bond, because that was 2005. And not until 2014 did we have that significant legislation that really broke the ground in Prop 1 to acknowledge what we're doing now. Because we look at these as great strides, but really we're talking only just, we're just barely peeling that very first layer of voices that we have been trying to elevate for the last 20 years, as Secretary Wade Crowfoot mentioned. Would you mind to share that experience? Because I think that was something that's really a great experience. I'd love our audience who have not been a part of that to know about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well before Prop 1 in this particular program, this has been a work in progress. So as integrated regional water management planning has evolved, you know, we've been trying to figure out how we live up to that vision of what integrated regional water management planning is striving to be. We haven't gotten it perfect. We're still working on that. But throughout that process, there has been a huge amount of efforts throughout different regions and in different ways and through different stakeholders to develop a more inclusive table and vision and effort for how to make that happen. And there were a number of pilot projects that were funded actually through the DWR's program over time. I was fortunate to be part of one of those. There's where and a lot of those programs really, I think all of them particularly focused on what were called then disadvantaged communities, and looking at how we could invest even more in making this these groups and integrated regional water management planning work for community needs in ways that it hadn't before. And, you know, there were groups around the state that had been doing this. You know, we had the opportunity to come together and really, like this, start to learn from each other what worked, what didn't, how can we chart a pathway forward. And that really did inform how this program developed. So once there was funding through Prop 1 and helping to ensure how that funding was created, it also really informed how the agency looked at investing that funding. So rather than it really looked at how it's getting to, particularly to those folks on the ground that are doing the hard work that often weren't invested in, and that there were real barriers to inclusion, and there continues to be barriers. But with this, I think through the work that was done before and that opportunity to convene, it really did inform how this program is developed. And I think this convening is just that. It's a chance to now say, okay, we have another chance to learn from the work that's been done through this program, this next iteration, and look at what have we learned and what's the pathway forward to informing that next iteration. And so I thank you for pointing that out, and I do really think it's illustrative of the importance of these kinds of convenings to really impact how programs, particularly at the state level, are able to be improved and developed over time, and then also share lessons learned from the many groups that are working in different regions, so that we can hear what's worked, what have been challenges, and how to chart a pathway forward.
Great, thank you. I don't want you to leave quite yet, because adding on to the convenings, what we've done with how closely we work with Department of Water Resources and State Water Resources Control Board, and the appreciation with going from that DAC convening, then going into the tribal water summits as another parallel track of also elevating the voices of tribal communities. Because I want to point out in Proposition 1, that was the first time that tribal governments were even considered to be an eligible grantee outside of having to be a sub-grantee. And you used a term today, and I have to apologize to our audience because, we go into the jargon of acronyms, and DAC, disadvantaged community, and you use DACTI, DAC-TI, and that's tribal involvement. And that's a term that the community is elevating. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because that is not in the legislative mandate of DAC. And I think that's a good example of the community saying, we're embracing this program, and we're identifying it to reflect who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, again, it's an example of the need to involve and listen to communities about what's working and who's included and who's not included, and recognizing that there haven't been the opportunities and efforts made to make sure that we're being really deliberate about creating appropriate spaces and approaches for engaging with a variety of stakeholders and important players, not just stakeholders, but real decision makers in and of themselves, whether it's tribal governments, members of tribal communities, or disadvantaged communities, marginalized communities from throughout the state that come from their own needs, their own vision for what regional water management planning needs to look like. So I think that has been a really important evolution, and I know you have been a big part of helping our state agencies to make sure that we're stepping up to that broadened and more informed, frankly, vision of how we make this effective and live up to that goal.
That's great. Thank you. I've got another question for you. How do you think the work of different state agencies, how can the work of different state agencies seeking community-led planning integrate and learn from each other?
Yeah. Well, I think that this convening is a good example of trying to recognize and bring together the various agencies that are together part of water decision making. It's kind of odd in California because we are so fragmented in our governance structures, where we have, even at the state level, different agencies that have different roles within water management and water decision making, and certainly even more so at the local and regional level. So I think that's why the vision here is integrated in this case, regional water management planning, but integrated water management is fundamental for overcoming that fragmentation, for developing more of a common vision, and then again, charting a pathway forward for how we work together more. I think that integrated regional water management plans, have focused on the regional level for good reason. But we need to do more at the state level and certainly at the local level too, to look at how throughout our water governance we can create more integration and more involvement and achieve more effective and equitable water management outcomes.
Great, thank you. And I do have one more comment before we release you and then allow our audience to take a quick break. Secretary Crowfoot said something a little bit about systemic racism, and as a state agency representative and myself as one, I think we kind of fall back under the cover of that's for the larger community. But I do think that we are now addressing that in the state government structure. Could you talk a little bit about that, about how, as a state agency, what can we do to implement these state mandated programs to create equity?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that there's an opportunity now that that there's a greater recognition of the reality of racial justice challenges that we have, and the way in which each of us, but particularly government agencies, can work to change that, or if we ignore it, we may exacerbate that. So I know that each of our agencies are looking specifically at what more we can do, how we can be more deliberate in this. I can speak to the State Water Resources Control Board. We're launching a racial justice initiative to engage both reflection internally about how we bring racial justice to a lens to look at how we can support and create a more just and inclusive and racially just culture and workforce within our own agency, which is where it starts. Let's look inside at each of us, but also look externally about what are the decisions that we're making as government agencies? How are the impacts of those decisions resulting in disparities, particularly around along the lines of race? And we won't be able to see that unless we're very deliberate about looking at that. It's true with any of the, I think this is exactly why we're talking about engagement and inclusion of communities and marginalized and impacted communities at the regional level. A lot of times agencies don't see that. They're not going to see their own blind spots and what they're missing unless we have those that are most impacted helping to raise that more global awareness of how that plays out, how decision making plays out. And maybe there's, certainly in most cases, not an intentional motivation, but certainly a very real and concrete way that those decisions play out differently for groups. We've been looking at the State Water Board, starting to recognize that frankly, every decision we make, every program that we have, we need to look at how that results in racial disparities and talk with communities to help us think about what are the ways that we can dismantle that, what are the ways we can start to change the way that we do things so that we can overcome those systemic racism, those systems of oppression that have been really deeply built into our programs and programs throughout the state.
Thank you, Laurel, so much. Appreciate your comments and for indulging me with this opportunity to have this conversation. I believe we're scheduled for a break shortly, and I do want to say that the today's programming, after the break, what we're going to be hearing is we're going to be hearing from practitioners who have been tasked with the challenges that was brought up in Secretary Crowfoot's open remarks, as well as what you have experienced with the community work, and then now obviously incorporating the new legislation. And I guess the next convening we'll be having to review what is the new legislation and how that's going to impact the communities we serve. So I do want to say thank you very, very much for that. And at this time, then, I believe I will return it back to Emily in terms of to inform our audience about how long the break is. Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, Wade. And thank you, Rich, for the morning. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. And thank you, Anecita. So impressed with our speakers and that really fruitful discussion. We are now going to head into a brief break. We will be reconvening at 10 a.m. You can just keep yourself muted and off video. Go grab a quick cup of coffee, take a bio break, and we will see you back here at 10 a.m. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Hope everyone enjoyed the break. Just wanted to give a shout out to my latest addition, my new tea mug. This is from the Lumi Nation, and this is a really great representation of their eagle and the various clan totems that they share up in the state of Washington. So anyone have any interesting mugs, let us see it, maybe opportunity later on. So welcome back once again, and I just want to turn things over to Mike Antos for this moderated session, and he's going to introduce our panel, and we're going to be discussing the first decade of integrated regional water management. Mike?
Good morning, everybody. It's good to, actually, I can't see any of you, so it's nice to have you all here. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. We have three folks who've been involved in IRWM for the past, probably over 10 years, honestly. And we're not going to do bios as you heard today, so I'll just introduce them from where they're coming from. And we're going to spend this 45 minutes really just kind of in a Q&A discussion, sharing stories about the work that we've done. One of the things, just to set the stage a little bit, I was really excited to see when the California Water Resilience Portfolio was released back in July. I have a favorite part. You can kind of tell I'm a water nerd because I have a favorite part of the Water Resilience Portfolio. But it's the chapter called Moving Forward, Regional Networks, State Support. And it's actually my favorite part is that title. And it's the rest of the portfolio, of course, is good too, but that's my favorite part. And when you think about our path of moving forward using regional networks with state support, that really encapsulates the Integrated Regional Water Management Program and what it has given us in California over the last 10 years. So I'm going to ask the facilitator to bring my other co-panelists, the panelists up on the screen with me. I hope we're going to be able to do a Brady Bunch squares here with all four of us. There we go. So first I'll introduce Jennifer Hazard. She's the RCAC Regional Contracts Manager. That's Jennifer there in the middle on my screen. And then Holly Alpert is the IRWM Coordinator for the Cal Rural Water Association. She's there on the top on my screen. Nope, now she's in the middle. Apparently it gets jumped around some. And then Javier Silva is with the California Indian Environment Alliance. And the group of us are going to have this discussion. I wanted to kind of first go to Jennifer to talk a little bit about how you got involved in the San Diego IRWM group and what that experience has been like for the time that you've been doing it.
Oh, thanks, Mike, and thanks for having me. That's an interesting question, and it fits in with today's subject because when I started my involvement with I started with the San Diego IRWM. My history starts as being a member of the public. So I used to attend their regional advisory committees as an employee of Alter Terra. We were a small nonprofit looking for funding for a source control project in the San Diego border region. So San Diego-Tijuana border region. And we applied for funding and were unsuccessful because we were a pretty small organization. And I had the opportunity, based on one of, I think it was Mark Stadler had what he likes to call a speed dating session, where we have the opportunity to get to know other possible project partners. And that's where I was introduced to the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, RCAC, which is where I work now. So if it wasn't for that collaborative exercise that Mark sponsored, I wouldn't have been able to have that partnership. And because of that partnership, we were able to apply for funding as part of a basket of projects that RCAC put forward. So it was a very successful introduction. So thanks for that question, Mike.
Thanks, Jennifer. And how about we go over to Holly? Holly, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in IRWM in the Inyo-Mono region and what that program found when it arrived there and what it's given the region in the time that you've been working with it.
Hi, Mike. Nice to see everybody. I got involved with the Inyo-Mono program at the time that it was getting started in 2008. They were having their first few meetings. I happened to attend a meeting when I was still a grad student and just sort of fell into working with them through a part-time position, and have been working with them ever since. And doing outreach in the Inyo-Mono region, which is a very rural, far away from Sacramento, very large region geographically, it's always been focused on outreach to DACs and tribes by necessity. We have a lot of DACs and tribes, and even outreach that wasn't specifically to DACs was still to small rural communities that function very much like DACs. So early on, we found that that was the landscape that we walked into, and we've been doing that outreach ever since because it's an ongoing process. And I think what it's brought to the region over time is a lot of resources, largely from state funding, be it either projects or technical assistance, and I think maybe even more importantly, resources with our stakeholders informing each other. So those relationships being built among stakeholders and being able to share resources among themselves and start to lean on each other for support. And I don't know that would have happened without the IRWM program, certainly not on the scale that it has in our region. Some of them may be funding each other, but for example, Ridgecrest may not be talking to Mammoth Lakes, kind of two communities on opposite ends of our region. So I think that's kind of where we've gotten right now with the program.
Thanks, Holly. How about you, Javier? Talk a little bit about what IRWM program has meant for the regions where you've worked and how you became to be involved and the roles that you've played over the years.
How long do we have? I wanted to share my mug too, Anecita. I'd like to thank my brothers up north in Blue Lakes for their wonderful gift to me. I like that mug. It's one of my favorites. So, so I was. It's been 10 years, for a little over 10 years for since I got involved in the North Coast IRWM, and we were approached about inclusion. A group of the tribes got together to discuss what that inclusion would look like, what it should look like, what we wanted, what we were asked, what we were looking to get into, because I did not understand IRWM. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how it was going to benefit the tribe. And when the tribes have been historically asked to get involved in actions and such, it's usually because of the tribal status of the tribe or because of our position politically, and it is an advantage for some folks. So tribes have historically been taking advantage because of that, and usually get the brunt end of that stick because we don't get what we've asked for. So when we're asked to get involved in something, the first thing I do is question that. It's why? What's the benefit for the tribe? When we looked into this, into the IRWM, yeah, what stood out to us was the integrated approach. It's on paper that we're going to collaborate, we're going to work together. These are stakeholders getting together on deciding what happens in the region on water projects. And most of the tribes felt that yes, we probably should be in there at the beginning rather than at the end, because they're eventually going to have to come to us to about each of these projects, or they're doing these projects in our historical use areas. So what better way to drive those projects or influence those projects than to be at the beginning stages, the planning. And so we found out that this was an opportunity for tribes to integrate themselves into this region, but also into the locals, into the local regions as well. And so I saw the advantage of working with the county and working with our cities as a benefit for the tribe, and opening up those dialogues where historically it's not been. So that's my short answer.
That's great. No, I appreciate that, Javier. So something that's really interesting to think back to what the IRWM program was really built. So back when it was being considered to be created, one of the things that was really imagined was that there needed to be a reason for people to start talking to each other and learn how to be more integrated. And that's really the basis of the IRWM program back when it was created, was that and this is not true for all regions equally, but of course that everyone needed to sort out how to work together better, and this was a way to kind of incentivize that. And the Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program, DACTI, it now has adopted many different names, right? That became another evolution of that, is like, how do we make sure not just that everyone is working together, but that everyone has an opportunity to be there when the working together happens. And what's interesting in some of our preparation and some of the notes that all of you passed me, there's very often in the way you've talked about the place where you work, you use the word we a lot. And that we does a lot of work in a way that we don't often think about, right? So talk a little bit about how your region has come to discover that they are a we, that it is a group that may have different needs, different goals, different responsibilities, but when it's a team, there's some step forward that are possible that might otherwise not be. I see a smile from Holly. Maybe I'll call on you first. So how did IRWM and the work that you do help create a new we that works together?
The first 4 or 5 years of our IRWM group, I don't think we talked about water once. We were talking a lot about governance. We were talking a lot about who's sitting at the table, how to get a very inclusive group of people sitting at the table. We talked a lot about process, but we didn't yet have a conversation about water, because we were setting up the group and the process, and that was, in the end, as we see it now, much more important than the actual discussions about water, because 12 years later, we're still going, and we now can have robust discussions about water and projects and funding, and stakeholders and group members are looking out for each other. And they've been very altruistic in how they allocate money within the region to communities and water systems. And so that makes us just a group of strangers working together.
That's great. How about you, Javier? I know the North Coast Resources Partnership is really, it reaches well beyond IRWM today. And how much of the fact that it exists did IRWM help make happen? And then how has that grouping sort of transcended the program as a we?
Well, it's been a great opportunity for the tribes to get together, first and foremost, because when we get together, it's usually about, an emergency action or something we need to respond to as soon as possible. So it gave us the opportunity to discuss things well in advance, discuss things openly. There are, there's opportunities for tribes to discuss projects that, that in fact, influence both of them or affect both of them, both tribes or multiple tribes. They just never knew how that would, how it impacted everybody and how it happened. So we have these conversations where now we're sharing that information, we're sharing that the knowledge we have in the watersheds in the North Coast and the differences between them, and it's great to see. And I think that I think what keeps the tribal involvement in the North Coast is that we mentality. It's not singular. There's not one tribe that's leading. That's the one tribe you go to. It's a we thing up in the North Coast, and I think that's the way we want to keep it, because not one tribe speaks for all tribes, and we're not all in the same boat. And so it's a constant struggle to continue to send that message. Is like, we are all different. We all have different circumstances, and we're all in different capacity levels. And so, we need to make sure we're looking out for everyone. So that's a great way of, it's what the IRWM has brought to the North Coast as far as for the tribes to get together and talk about water. And that's led into conversations about a lot of other topics and resource issues.
Thanks. How about you, Jennifer? It was actually one of your notes to me that really triggered me thinking this way about this we, about how your region has become a we in how it adapts to challenges and how it considers what solutions it's brought to the table. So how does that idea of building a new we resonate with the work that you've done?
Well, when I hear the word we, I don't just think of it as we, the San Diego region, because I work in multiple regions. So I'm a regional advisory committee member for the San Diego IRWM, but the we at RCAC, our technical assistance providers, are also working in Upper Santa Margarita, Central Coast, Sacramento River. We're all over the state assisting our communities. And I also think of the rural, tribal, and underrepresented communities that we serve. And what we try to do at RCAC is work with even the larger we, which is the regulators, local primacy agencies, the county health, Indian Health Services, to represent those communities and bring forth what we like to call baskets of projects. So we serve like as an umbrella that supports the smaller communities that would otherwise be overlooked when it comes to funding. So a lot of project partners, and right now in just the round 4 Prop 84, we're working with 7 different communities to help them move their projects forward. So when we think about those barriers to inclusion in the IRWM program, I think of the we as the support that provides that inclusion for communities that otherwise wouldn't be able to participate.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jennifer. And actually, that you've given me a good segue, and I might come right back to you again. IRWM does support all this social work that we've been talking about, of people getting to know each other and working together. But at the end of the day, it also helps us choose among a whole suite of potential projects which ones we should elevate as our regions and move forward to our regional benefit. And Jennifer, I wonder if you do want to go a little bit deeper on some of the projects and the successes that you've seen IRWM program bring for the communities that you're supportive of. So how has this program helped us actually build good projects for communities that otherwise might not have gotten the things that they need?
Well, I can speak to our needs assessment work in both Central Coast and Sac River. We had some really wonderfully flexible work plans in those areas. So the needs that were identified as part of that outreach then became technical assistance projects, where our CAC TAPs, technical assistance providers, were able to take it a step farther and to give them that assistance. So whether they needed technical, managerial, or financial capacity assistance, we were able to assist with rate studies, income surveys, helping provide training for their board or their water system operators. And in San Diego, we did something really, I really appreciated Mark allowing us to we formed a disadvantaged community stakeholder group. And so we sat down as a team, Indian Health Services, Division of Drinking Water, the district engineer, among others, and really put together a list of at-risk and vulnerable water systems who needed assistance. And then we were able to put forth those projects for construction implementation. So right now, actually, I think over 3 rounds of funding, we were able to support 12 different communities for, I think, half of them were tribal and the other half were rural, anything from building a water tank to trash booms at the border to completely revamping water systems. So one of the barriers to participation was that financial aspect, where you have to prove that you can carry the expenses of your project, and not many small rural communities can do that. So we were able to bring forth that sort of construction bridge loan aspect to support the projects. So thanks for that question, Mike.
Yeah, that's great. How about you, Javier? What sorts of projects has the partnership that's formed up there in the North Coast sort of brought out into the world because of IRWM? What's actually been built that are helping communities that might otherwise not have been able to receive that sort of support?
I think along the same line, there's a lot of assistance going to capacity building, in the realms of the managerial aspects, because within the tribes in the North Coast, there's just a great need for the capital and the experience and the managerial level with water and wastewater, and going on up. And I've seen that with non-tribal as well, where there's a utility boards and such, where there's just that need that I think that's always going to be needed. I've been on a utility board, and it's not something you just know, and you're always going to be learning something, and something's going to be challenging and different. And so what I think is alluded to a lot of tribes in the North Coast is that fact, something we've already really known a lot, and the ability to share resources too. And I think that's a big one that's come out. We have tribal water operators who become either state certified or federally certified, and some tribes are able to have that, and some tribes are not, either financially or managerially. And so so I think we have an opportunity to develop a resource sharing program, or some sort of program out of this that could be beneficial for tribes and not have to, cost them an arm and a leg in order to keep, their water and wastewater facilities up. So I think that's something that we've seen, and it's been great, because the tribes have never been able to discuss these very similar issues that give them a heartache. I mean, operations and maintenance costs are not the forefront of every tribal, council or government body. They we want to put our money into education and businesses and others such. So it's not at the forefront, and we're bringing that. We're hopefully bringing some solutions or some ideas here that could be shared across the state or with other tribes as well. So working with IHS and EPA as well because that's who tribes have been familiar with. That's where a lot of they've been turning to for some of these solutions, and so we've been working with them as well to come up with these options, and I think it's been great. I think we're going to come up with something here in the North Coast that could benefit some tribes that really need it.
Thanks, Javier. And let's go over to Holly to wrap this question about projects up. How has the IRWM program and this partnership that's formed around it helped bring projects into Inyo Mono region that might otherwise not have been able to get done?
One of the things that was really eye-opening for us as we started getting into the process of the IRWM program was the really basic need for water supply, water quality projects. I think those basic issues may not be news in a lot of other parts of California, but in the eastern region and the more desert region, we maybe made an assumption that the real basic water supply, water quality issues were covered, that there weren't issues out there. So those projects quickly came to the fore, and I don't think that they would have gotten taken care of because these communities are so small, the water systems are so small. One, they don't necessarily have the resources to do these projects on their own with their own funding, so they would rely on grant funding, but maybe don't necessarily have the knowledge or skill set to be able to apply for that grant funding. So to be able to go through the IRWM process where there are other people to help them, we've been able to get several projects done like that now. Two quick examples. The granitic bedrock under the Sierra creates some issues with arsenic and uranium in our groundwater. So a school up in Colville had uranium in its groundwater, and the kids have been drinking bottled water for the last 15 years that had been trucked in. So we put in just a very small ion exchange plant up there. Now school kids have good drinking water. So, that was and it was partially funded by CDPH back when they were the agency, and it was a real win-win. And then kind of on the other end of water supply, not for drinking water, but we were able to replace a bunch of hydrants in the Big Pine Paiute tribe. And these hydrants were so old, 40, 50, 60 years. Some of them were tiny little hydrants. So it was a nice success to be able to show that a tribe that has had issues with fire, not only on the reservation, but they're adjacent to wildland. So threats from wildland fire, that they're now able to be able to defend their own land.
That's really great. We have a bunch of questions I see floating through a couple of different directions from folks in the audience, and I'm going to try to tack a few of them on to the time we have. We have about 20 minutes left, so I think that'll be okay. There's a fancy word that you occasionally run into called it says reciprocity. And that essentially means that you have faith that when you give, you're going to get something in return. And the idea of the IRWM program and building into these partnerships, the fact that there's never enough resources to do all the things that need doing, and that the people who participate have to prioritize and agree to go in certain order of things. And I'm interested to reflect a little bit on how the projects have played out through the groups that you've been part of, because those groups have to understand that this time around, it might not be my project that's getting funded, and I'm going to support you getting yours, because I know next time around I can trust that you're going to support me getting mine. And that sort of relationship, the strength of that relationship, is one of, I think, the key outcomes in the regions that have achieved it. And Javier, I see you shaking your head just a little bit. I'm curious how you would reflect on that, the trust that comes between the people who do this work and the organizations that they represent.
Well, trust is a big word, but you know, in the North Coast, it's been, really well organized in the way that they've divided the funding up, and it's been pretty transparent regarding, regional representation. There is I think that's different than reciprocity. Reciprocity. I can't. My English is not that great, but so there's, when you talk about reciprocity, you're talking about, what tribes would put into a project. It's like, when we want to develop a water source, and when we want to, remove some invasive species, we're going to develop that project where there's going to be something given back to us. There's going to be a benefit for that for that project. There's going to be something where we're going to let members in, and there's going to be some use to that. And that's when I think, when I hear that word, we're going to go manage resource, because we're going to see some benefit from it. The regional representation that I was talking about earlier, with the the financial, the projects, the funding coming out, that the tribes are, I think, in the North Coast, feeling really comfortable with what they get out of compared to the rest, and there is a give and take. The tribes do, when I think they're in the North, especially with the Karuk tribe and others, where they collaborate with other partners, either it's the county or state or the federal forest, where there is some of that, where you've developed that partnership, and now there's that shared trust, or where they're collaborating on a project, and then there's that relationship built with finance, with the financials in there, with money getting shared. So that takes a lot, and it's one example, and it's one small one, or one big one, because many tribes, there's 30 tribes in the North Coast, and over 30 tribes, and many of them cannot do that. They don't have the capacity to do that. So they're going to rely on people, and they're going to trust folks to help them out with their projects, and hope that it comes back to them. So that's my thoughts on your question, Mike.
Thanks, Javier. Jennifer, when we think about strong networks, people networks, one of that key dimensions is that for a network to thrive, everyone who's in it needs to recognize that they're giving something and they're getting something, and it's by giving that someone else gets, and by them giving, you get. And that idea that there needs to be that trust, that if you're going to give, you're going to get as well. I'm just curious how that resonates with the work that you've done in the IRWM program in the various regions that you've been part of.
Well, that's a complex
unfortunately, I'm very
question,
good at complex questions.
I guess, yeah, I guess I could speak to how well in the San Diego IRWM, in our regional advisory committee, we have a really diverse group of representatives from the different industries, right? So water quality. What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought there. We have caucuses, right? So our disadvantaged community caucus, water management, watershed management, resource management, and we all come together to review these projects that are brought forth during each and every round of funding. And I think that the way we have it set up, the way that we take the time to review the projects and spread them out over multiple watersheds, that's sort of our give and take. Well, okay, maybe this funding round, we focused on this watershed or that watershed, and the next time we're going to go here. And I think also the community engagement that's offered, the public input that the advisory committee spends a lot of time listening to public input and reacting and responding and providing positive feedback. So I hope that answered your question.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. I know it's a tough one because it's not something it's something we all benefit from all the time in these processes, that we come to know each other as individuals, regardless of what hat we're wearing or what job we're doing. We come to know each other and we start to have faith in each other. And that actually becomes some of the glue that makes this program successful, but we often don't actually focus on it. So I respect the panel handling this question about something that isn't normally what we drag up and talk about when we're doing this work.
And
so
you
Holly,
know that
go ahead, Jennifer.
Aspect, no, that aspect of reciprocity, I have had projects rejected, right? So in one round we put together, I thought, a really good basket of community projects, and it was rejected because RCAC had already received funding in the past. That was the sole reason, and it took some education there to let those RAC members know that it's not RCAC that was being rejected. It was all of those communities that made up that basket. And so, you know, in the next round of funding, it was my turn. So there you go. We all take turns.
Exactly. That's great. Thank you. Holly, how about you? I don't know, you have, I mean, you've been steeped in the Yamona region, but I know you have a broader gaze on the IRWM program and your participation with the Roundtable of Regions for years, and you worked alongside me in the Santa Ana region for a while. So just from this really complicated, tough question, you know, what have you sort of seen as true coming out of IRWM and all the practitioners of it about building that trust, that everyone's got a relatively similar goal, and you may take turns, but everyone's going to get a turn. Have you seen that play out?
Maybe I'm a little naive. I haven't thought of it as reciprocity, or I haven't seen it that way, I guess. In the areas where I've worked, I think the stakeholders, the regional water management groups, have recognized that the really basic water supply, water quality issues, and projects and issues in DACs and tribes need to rise to the top. And I in my experience, I think a lot of regional water management groups are making that happen through the criteria through which they evaluate projects and rank projects within their IRWM groups. I haven't witnessed firsthand the thinking of, well, I'm getting mine now, I'm going to make sure you get yours now, and I get mine in the next round. And I also wonder if maybe we're not far enough into it in some of these regions to see that. Maybe another 10 years in, we would start to, but because we're still dealing with some of the really basic issues, I feel like we need to get those taken care of. And I know it's not an exact endpoint, but we need to continue working on those before we can then start kind of going tit for tat. I don't know. The word altruism keeps coming to my mind. I've witnessed a lot of it, and to me that's sort of opposite of reciprocity. Not necessarily, but I've seen a lot more altruism.
Well, I really appreciate that, Holly. So the last question I've got, and then I'm going to try to squeeze in some of the ones from the audience that have been passed through to me. You know, the subtitle of our event here today is How Far We've Come, and Yet We're Far From Done. I'm curious if each of you can just reflect a little bit on what's a challenge or a hurdle that's still something we need to overcome, right? That we've been talking till now about really some of the great benefits and the progress that we've made in the program. What is for you the next big thing that still hasn't really been solved by this program that needs to be solved as it moves forward? And maybe I'll go back to Holly first on this one.
My biggest fear is that we're not going to be able to continue this work without more financial support from the state. We're, again, a lot of us more rural regions without big water agencies or counties or municipalities to support these IRWM programs. We're almost fully dependent on the bond funding. And so when that goes away, presumably at the end of Prop 1, without other funding coming in behind it, I think a lot of these regional water management groups will go away. And so that stops in the tracks the good work that we're doing. And of course, we've realized other benefits that we can look back on, but it prevents us from continuing that work and building on it. So it's not a challenge of the program at the regional level per se, but the challenge is not being able to continue the work because there's not financial support for it.
Thanks, Holly. How about you, Jennifer? Where would you put the next hurdle or challenge that you think needs to be overcome by those of us in the program working together?
That's a great question. Thank you. I think we've come a long way. In my 10 years with the San Diego IRWM, we've come a long way to reducing the barriers to tribal and rural community participation in the program. But I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. And, great examples are that many of the tribal and rural communities, they're spread across multiple watersheds. So, and therefore, they're exposed to multiple regional agencies, right? And so they're being kind of bombarded from all sides, and it gets confusing and sort of frustrating for some of those communities to know which avenues to take for funding. And sometimes that's good. I mean, we have projects where we're getting some funding from Indian Health Services, some from USDA Rural Development, some from State Division of Drinking Water, and then IRWM. And so the answer to those barriers, I think, is even greater collaboration than we have currently. So the future would maybe look like an engagement unit, right? Like a rural and tribal engagement unit made up of stakeholders across multiple agencies, right? So that committee could be evaluating the vulnerability and the needs of communities. If we had Indian Health Services, Division of Drinking Water, IRWM, regulators, all on the same team, working together to support those communities, I think that's really the future of how we can ensure inclusion and engagement of those communities going forward.
Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate that. How about you, Javier? Where would you put the next hurdle or challenge we need to overcome?
Well, it's a great task, and it's over 200 years of being stepped on and put into the back burner regarding any of our resource needs, and I'm talking about for the tribes in California. And one thing that when we first got involved was the disputes over jurisdiction and land and water rights. And I think that in California that's going to be something that's really going to be coming down, and it's going to be a big hurdle for the state to deal with, especially when we talk about tribes and historical uses and others and other state uses for water. So I think that's going to be something that is kind of like still out there. Many tribes are worried about it and are concerned about it, concerned about their water, concerned about their health and their environment. And not only on their reservations of 100 acres or 200 acres or even thousands of acres, but on our historical use areas, because we don't just stay in the reservation. So we go within our territory. So jurisdictions, those battles are going to be hurdles for the state and the tribes to be dealing with. The example going now with land acknowledgement, the land acknowledgement can only do so much, and it's appreciative to understand that people know where they're at, but it's another thing to actually do something about it. And bringing back tribal voices, tribal songs, and tribal language back to these lands is going to be important, because that's what you need to bring and bring back sustainability to the land. That's what's going to take. So, is it a challenge? Is it going to be a barrier? Yeah, it is. And I think that in this state that has quite a few people compared to tribal people, it's going to be more of a challenge for the tribes. So, any assistance we can have, or any, opportunity the tribes can have to, make changes for themselves, is I think, should be taken advantage of. So that's my.
Thanks, Javier. No, that's really great. And we only have a couple of minutes left, and I've been scanning the questions that have been passed to me by some of the meeting facilitators, and many of them are things that are elsewhere in the agenda of either today or the future sessions. So I'm just going to flash across a couple of them. Some folks are asking about how cool your shirt is, Javier, for one thing, and then there's questions about how to make sure you can track the long term from the planning of a project to the project itself to implementation. Yeah, there you go. And then, hey, Tech, can you put Javier up on the main screen? There you go. There's the shirt everyone's complimenting. Nice. Okay, back to me. But I am also they're also waving at me about the only time left. So first off, let me, before I run out of time, thank the three panelists for signing up to take on this role here at the beginning, because this 3-day workshop is really about the disadvantaged community and tribal involvement program element of the IRWM program. And throughout the rest of the sessions, you'll hear about IRWM program in the background of the discussions about how to engage with communities, how to bring community voice into the program, how to nurture these long-term relationships with all peoples, and to really benefit California broadly, building these regional networks so that we can move forward together. And all of that will be embedded in the background of all of the future work all the future sessions that you hear over the next couple of days. So I was really excited to be able to moderate this panel with this group, talking about where we've been and where we are today in the broad program and how we're going to move forward together. And I guess with that, I should probably hand it back to Anecita, with my apologies to all the great questions that we just did not have time for. Hopefully you'll find answers elsewhere in the event.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. I really appreciate that discussion, and that wrap up was really important to understand that that is the background and the backbone of the framing that we've set aside for this 3-day summit. We just touched upon issues, especially with the land acknowledgement and what Javier said about sustainability. I just wanted to let folks know that if you've looked at the agenda, hopefully you'll be joining us for the community and tribal leader panel discussion, where we'll really take a good look at some of those issues as well. At this point, I believe we are going to take another quick break. And again, Holly, Jennifer, Javier, Mike, thank you so much, for teeing up our amazing discussion. And we'll, Emily, I think we're going to, you'll reconfirm our time that we'll be reconvening, and see you all back here at 11 for the next session. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your short break there, and thank you for staying with us. Really appreciate the attendance we have, and also wanted to say thank you for the amazing break music. I've noticed, we had a little Water Me by Lizzo, and then Dock of the Bay. So I appreciate our playlist, and wanted to hear a little bit more of that vibe of Aretha Franklin on that Bridge Over Troubled Water, which is not the theme we have here, but we are in troubled times. And but thanks for that to our facilitators. Right now, I'm going to be turning this over to Mark Stadler, and this is going to be our next panel discussion on the future of IRWM in a changing climate. So Mark will be coming along shortly and introducing the panel and teeing us up. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Anecita. Thank you very much. And thanks for everyone for joining us and for sticking around for this panel. We're going to be talking about, our panelists are going to be talking about the future of IRWM in a changing climate. And yes, we're using several different definitions of climate to hopefully intrigue you. I'm not going to be introducing the speakers per se. Their bios are in your packet. But first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about this panel. As a state in 2020, which is a year that cannot get over soon enough, we've confronted several situations, any one of which would be formidable, but they've all come at once. Just this year, the COVID-19 pandemic and then the resulting economic crisis both present obstacles that need to be adapted to and overcome, and they come on top of ongoing situations that are quite serious and need to be addressed, which are climate change and systemic racism, both of which have a big impact on what we do. In the IRWM regions, all 48 of them, folks have adapted to the situation produced by the pandemic and the economic crisis, and we continue to do our jobs and get things done, and hopefully we'll be able to go back to some form of normal within the next year. But we know as IRWM practitioners that we cannot continue to operate as we have, particularly since tribes and other marginalized communities and underrepresented communities often have not been given the type of role that they should have and that we need them to have when it comes to water management decision making. IRWM offers an opportunity to think about these things collaboratively, to work across sectors and jurisdictional boundaries, and to find holistic solutions to these and other community water needs. In order to work collaboratively, though, we need to first understand local perspectives and statewide lessons learned. So what I'm going to be doing, I have the privilege to introduce our a group of panelists who are going to offer those perspectives on the future of IRWM in this changing climate. We will be joined first by Martha Camacho Rodriguez, a water advocate for the people of South Los Angeles, who will share her perspectives on the future of marginalized community involvement in water management in the face of COVID-19 and the resulting economic challenges. Then we'll hear from Carmel Brown, the Financial Assistance Branch Manager for the Division of Regional Assistance at the Department of Water Resources, and our Summit MC, Anecita Agustinez, who is the Department of Water Resources Tribal Policy Advisor, and they will share their statewide lessons learned from marginalized communities and tribal engagement efforts. And then we'll hear from Lynn Rodriguez, who is my fellow co-chair of the statewide IRWM Roundtable of Regions, and also she directs the LA Ventura Area Disadvantaged Community Involvement Task Force, and she will share where she sees the future of IRWM headed in the light of the changing social, political, and environmental climate. Each of our panelists will share a brief presentation, and then when all three are done, we will take audience Q&A. Please type your questions into the chat, and we will track them as they come in and address as many as possible at the end of the presentations. And so let's start with Martha. Martha's muted.
Sorry about that. So I wanted to start with a Mayan thought. En lak ek halaken, I am you as you are me. It's a statement of unity and oneness. And so as we come here today, I want to go ahead and say thank you to everyone. that is present and that continues to be a voice for the voiceless and continues to look out for the individuals who are gravely impacted by the regions that are contaminating, in air, water, and soil. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about forever chemicals. These are químicas para siempre, and what's in your water. I think as we have seen some present information about the contamination in our regions, I wanted to speak on the area that I live, my backyard. So I'm a resident of Downey, and as a resident of Downey, I consider myself an individual and a voice of many people who, like myself, are impacted by contamination. Our topic today specifically about water, we want to go ahead and see how is it that we have our state of water and the psychology of water and what's happening today with COVID-19 as we see how water is so essential in our survival. So nothing has changed about water being life and that, you know, we need water to sustain our everyday lives. What we have continued to see is that in these unprecedented times, some things just have not changed. And when we talk about the people in this region, we're specifically talking about people of color. We're talking about a group of individuals that are highly impacted by contamination. And so it's important as we come today as individuals and individuals of groups that we acknowledge that we need to change a lot of what's been happening in our systems. And when we say the systems, we talk about the systems of oppression, we talk about the embedded racism. And, you know, it was nice to see how we opened up the morning with acknowledging equity and inclusion. And what does that look like? So I can tell you from my region is a part of a disadvantaged community. And although some of the cities in that region may not be considered disadvantaged communities, we are still in the location of highly contaminated areas. And so our purpose today as a community voice is to elevate those stories that talk about what are our next steps and the changes that need to happen so that we can actually make improvements for the people that are highly impacted in the regions of what we consider disadvantaged communities. One of the statements that I heard over and over from many people who always speak on what their condition is, for people who are struggling just to survive and living paycheck to paycheck in this time during the pandemic, as things have really changed and just become extreme for many people who now they're not living paycheck to paycheck. Now they're in a 90-day time period where they're waiting to see if they're going to be evicted. Now they're in a waiting period to see where their next dollar will come from. And as we continue to have individuals that are living in those types of moments, extreme poverty, extreme exposure to issues that don't help their lives to change for the better, we need to go ahead and move forward with how can we make a change in what was to what needs to be. And so it's important for us to acknowledge that sometimes when we get together as groups, we can all come here and share stories, and we can all come in and give a snapshot of what a timeline looks like. And unfortunately, the gatherings and the snapshot shows us that the timeline can be a couple of years before anything changes. And my hope today as we convene is that we will look at changing timelines to reflect the needs of individuals who are gravely impacted. And as we move forward, you know, as a progressive state, you know, we're the only state in the nation that has a law that says that, you know, we have the human right to water. And so as we talk about the human right to water in this pandemic, what does that really mean? You know, how do we make words on paper actually become actions? We know that there are 1 million people in California that don't have access to clean, safe, affordable water, or that they've never understood what it meant to have water run through their pipes. And when we talk about that fact, we see that that's a third world country. California is the 5th largest economy. And when we say that with pride and knowing that we are the breadbasket of the world, how can we say that and be that and still have people living in third world conditions? So for myself and my backyard and our people, I say that while we know that we have 300 contaminated wells with PFAS and other identifiable contaminants, of those 343 exist in the region that I live in. And at the end of the day, so we can continue to talk about numbers, we can continue to talk about funding, we can continue to talk about what is set forth on paper, but the movement of actions is slow. And so we are here today as a collective to bridge all of those things that need to happen so that we can actually produce something that will benefit the people. One of the things that we discussed as a group was that when people in disadvantaged communities hear that there are millions, if not $1 billion, to address water, there's kind of like a blank stare. And the blank stare is not that people don't understand the dollar amount. The comment to that is usually, so much like other studies have shown that we are $1 million hoods, we generate also dollars for money. We generate dollars for water and the environment and the acknowledgement that there are problems in our community. But I think the blank stare for that moment for most people that speak to it say, so the money comes because we are a disadvantaged community. And people identify themselves to a dollar. And at the end of the day, so how is that dollar going to benefit me? And who holds those dollars? And so at the end of the day, we see who are these people. So we look at the faces and we hear the voices of individuals that have been impacted by PFAS, lead, manganese, chromium-6, and other contaminants that are in our water, in our air, in our soil. But specifically our topic of water, at the end of the day, we want to go ahead and see that those dollars move to action, and that if anything today, we as a group can be that voice that will tell the state, will tell the stakeholders that hold power over funds that need to be designated for these regions. And so it's important to note that the individuals in these regions acknowledge that we will continue to be identified as disadvantaged. And one of the things that we need to discuss when you start to label people, it goes back to the stereotypes. And so in funding, when we label communities disadvantaged and we put their markers on a map that these regions are disadvantaged, we take away from who they are, because at the end of the day, these people don't have a seat at the table. And while they don't have a seat at the table regarding these funds, they're not able to say, so how are these funds directly going to impact me? As I mentioned earlier, before people living paycheck to paycheck, and now people with no paychecks waiting to be evicted. How can we make connections of funding? And it's all related to water. In any way that you cut it, everything will be related to water. Our livelihoods will be related to water. Our existence is related to water. And so funding now that's coming down from the state, when we look and hear $1 billion for funding that will go to these regions, these individuals are in situations that are unprecedented. We're experiencing what will be our new normal under COVID-19. And at the end of the day, if people are not being serviced in the way that they should be, and we are not truly honoring the human right to water, that's the biggest bridge that we're encountering at this time. So one of the focal points for all of us should be pretty much a demand list. And the demand list, in my opinion, about our disadvantaged communities is that while they're able to generate billions of dollars to be spent, that those billions of dollars to be spent should directly go to things that will improve the livelihoods of these communities. How can we make that happen? Well, we can continue to talk about it, but while we don't take that money and directly offer it in a thing that benefits the community, no change will happen. We'll continue to talk about this another 15 years. And it's sad that we don't want to move to a new normal of actually using money to reinvest into human capital. And so the importance of these individuals should be that they generate billions of dollars for a need that does exist, and that we won't take a couple of years to get that to happen. And so those are the things that our voices need to tell all the people that have control over these situations. And as we move forward as a collective, that we should all have the common idea and notion that we should not have 1 million people that don't have access to water. We should not facilitate the path to privatization for water companies that fill the coffers of our politicians, and then they become beholden to them and not to the people who voted them in. So it's an interesting story that right now, as we move forward to what will be our new normal, and I hate to say that, what was normal? There was nothing normal before. There's nothing normal in living in poverty. There's nothing normal in living as a disadvantaged community. And so many of us, if not all of us in this panel here, and the people present here listening to this information, we come from privilege. For those of us that still have much of our lives not interrupted, and maybe the biggest change for us is that we have to stay home and we're doing our work from home. Nothing has changed for us except that we can't go out to work. But for those people who still have to try to do their jobs and be out exposing themselves to any risk and anything that might kill them immediately. You know, with COVID-19, that's what many people are exposed to every time they go out to work and have to be out in the public. And for many of us with privilege, zooming our day away, nothing has changed for us except that we acknowledge that we have privilege to be here, and we have privilege that hopefully will catapult us as a group to make changes for those people that don't hold that privilege that we have. And so with that being said, I appreciate that everyone came here today, and I hope that when you leave today that you will make calls to the designated elected officials in Sacramento and in the federal government and acknowledge that we have the power to make changes. A lot of times we don't say that our lack of progress is because of money. And we should be acknowledging that our lack of progress is because we don't want to change the system that keeps things in the status quo for those in disadvantaged communities. And so for us to truly use our privilege is a calling. It's something that everyone here today should acknowledge and should make a commitment. And that commitment is to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. And now we're going to turn it over to Anecita and Carmel from DWR.
Hi, everyone. I'll start. I'm Carmel Brown with the Division of Financial Assistance, Division of Regional Assistance or Financial Assistance Branch at the Department of Water Resources. We're responsible for implementing the program that Wade and Laurel talked about this morning. It is our Proposition 1 Disadvantaged Community and Tribal Involvement Grant Program. As Laurel mentioned, this was the first time that a voter-approved bond actually carved out some designated money for talking about human solutions, beyond just technology, beyond just shovel-ready projects, but the human solutions and meaningful inclusion of those that were traditionally underrepresented in our grant programs. We gave out $52 million to 12 grantees, and most of those funds we're about halfway through in spending the money. But I need to point out that when the money is gone, more work needs to continue. And as Martha just said, we need to continue to support these efforts. We can't just let them fall off. So key goals of our program have been to build trust and capacity for success, identifying, engaging those traditionally underrepresented communities in each of our 48 IRWM regions, providing a seat at the table and a voice in decision-making and governance, updating the governance structures which are outdated, and updating those plans to reflect all communities' interests and goals. And then most importantly, identifying some projects and developing those projects that will benefit the underrepresented communities, and then getting them ready for grants, getting them ready to apply for grants. And then the next slide. This is just a laundry list kind of all of the different things we're supporting with this particular unique program. And I'm not going to go over this list, but I want you to see that the focus is not on shovel-ready technology type projects. The focus is on the human solution, building human capacity, as Martha also talked about just before me. It's really about relationships. It's about building trust. It's about bringing people to the table and giving them a voice. And as Jennifer mentioned this morning, providing some technical assistance to build the human capacity. So the next slide. We are about halfway done with this program, this unique program, and we've got 12 grantees, as I mentioned earlier. They're all required to do needs assessments. And those needs assessments, there's about 9 of the 12 grantees that have completed at least a final draft of their needs assessment. They go over water and sanitation and wastewater type needs. I'm not going to go into the details of those. I am going to let you know that later hopefully by the end of the calendar year, we'll be releasing an interim report for those needs assessments. And the reason we're doing that halfway through the program is so that that information can help inform future funding needs, policy changes that need to happen, and some important legislative changes that need to happen. But 5 of the high-level findings that keep floating up for us in this grant program now that we're about 3 years into it are the need for better coordination and integration in our state agencies. And so we've already started this. We have a coordination group that kicked off last month with the State Water Board on the SAFER program, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and others who are working on needs analyses and needs assessments throughout the state. So we're really trying to coordinate our efforts there. But we recognize that there's also integration that needs to happen at the regional level between the integrated regional water management programs and the sustainable groundwater management programs, for example. There was an excellent webinar put on a couple of weeks ago by Maven's Notebook on the intersection of these 2 programs, where there's been some successes and where we need to do more. And I might encourage the facilitators today to find that link and put it in the chat at some point today, if that's possible. Number 2, we need greater support for these established foundations. Almost 20 years, as Wade said, has gone into building an established foundation of 48 regions. Now, we know that there's still more work to be done. We know that some regions are doing better than others. They're a bit more evolved. The North Coast, for example, such great inclusion of the tribal interests and having them involve tribal elders on the policy committees and the advisory committees. It's just been really great to see, and that's happening in some other regions as well. But it's just emerging in regions like San Francisco and the Central Coast with the Amah Mutsun, for example. So we have a lot more to do there, but let's not throw that work out. Really, let's build on it. Let's build on almost 20 years of experience. And the third one here is to consider how there's been inconsistent funding that's provided. In Proposition 50, we had, I'm trying to remember the number, $500 million. In Proposition 84, we had $1 billion. And then when we came to Proposition 1, we went back down again to $500 million. And it was the first time we got the carve out for some of this unique work that we're doing here today. But we need more sustainable funding. We need to look beyond just voter approved bonds, and look beyond general funds, which right now are being used for our economic hardship because of COVID. But is there some way to get some foundation funding? Are there alternative finance models? How can we leverage our state resources with the federal monies that are available? For example, for places that are hit hard by wildfires and flooding and can qualify for some of the disaster relief funding. How can we leverage that funding to do more of this work? So the next slide, 2 more high-level findings I wanted to talk about. One is enhancing our own ability as a state to support and work with underrepresented communities and tribes. We recognize and acknowledge we have a lot to learn. Anecita, who's on the panel with me today, has developed a course that she's teaching in DWR on cultural competency. And it's really, really important for us to acknowledge what we don't know and to really listen, and take the time to listen and understand the unique situation. And this is where diversity, equity, and inclusion came in. Both Wade and Laurel and Martha just now spoke about the need for us to really recognize what's going on in our world today and to look at our programs. We're looking within at our own workforces and our own policies, and we're trying to adapt as best we can, but we need to look at our programs as well. How can those programs be adapted? I'd like to thank the San Francisco Bay Area Integrated Regional Water Management Group, who are really doing this in a meaningful way and are challenging us as a state agency to look at our grant program and how we can evolve. And there's a panel presentation on day 2, I believe it's 2C, with James and Taylor from that program that will talk about what they're doing there. And then finally, we need to consider some alternative criteria for how we distribute money. We've largely done it based on geography and population, those first 2 factors shown there. But we should look at some other things. Up in the mountain counties area, they're challenging us to see, is there a way to also look at the benefits? So the water in the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir and that watershed, for example, benefits the folks down in the San Francisco region. Yet a lot of the money goes to the San Francisco region because that's where the population is. And then the mountain counties region doesn't get as much. So can we look at some other factors? And can we look at a more equitable way? And then finally, looking beyond just median household income and really looking at some of those labels we've created unintentionally, but they could be really harming things. Labels like disadvantaged community or DAC. Let's look beyond that and let's look for ways to have more equitable allocation of this funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmel. And I wanted to take some time to talk. My 2 slides are going to be on barriers to equitable inclusion and, what's a changing climate from a tribal perspective, and how do we utilize that perspective within state grant programs. And obviously changing climate can mean a lot of different things, and what I've learned and has been shared with me from the tribal communities is that the changing climate includes traditional and cultural values. We need to look at economic sovereignty, food sovereignty, energy sovereignty, and what we heard about earlier today from Martha is the right to water. And these are intrinsic values that we need to include in this equity discussion when we're looking at grant bonds, funding, and how we look at applications and how the community's needs are brought into that larger application, and ensuring the communities of interest, what is their autonomy in this decision-making process. And I think that the autonomy, and if we could advance to the next slide, is elevating the community voice. Because when we're looking at the community voice, it is equitable access to funding and also obviously to technical assistance. But when we talk about decision making, that is being a part of decision making, not just being able to say we have a voice as a stakeholder, we have a voice as a community of interest in an advisory capacity. It's that voice that is in that decision making process of, are you on the board? Are you in that decision-making capacity? Does our boards that we fund, and community boards, boards of supervisors, counties who take on the role as a grantee, does even your county boards and advocacy group reflect your community that you serve? That's a big challenge, and that's a challenge that our piece of the world with our funding is only looking at. We're fortunate to have a very forward-thinking governor who's challenged board makeup to reflect the community, to be diverse, to have also gender equity and parity on it. So it's something that has to be brought down at the community level when we're talking about governance structures and communities. We also want to look at the equitable access of websites, and I really want to thank our facilitators for making our slides available in Spanish language and having translation, because this is also making equity and accessibility for our communities. Websites, mission statements. I think we're in a time now when we can really truly look at our mission statements and are they reflective of the communities we serve and today's community, cultural, and political values and structures. And then what is the final budget for capacity building? Carmel mentioned about the challenges of funding and future funding. But even with today's funding, the challenges we have in the implementation of the next round of grant funding is, what is the capacity that we're building within these communities that is long-term and resilient? And so those are just some of the thoughts that I wanted to talk about, and just plant further seeds of thoughts. I put a couple of things there on the top bullets about the prior convenings, the tribal water summits, the lesson learned summits, and our recent tribal regional water management series. We did this early spring, so we're hoping to have some links here that you'll be able to get to. I know that prior convenings already linked. We'll link the summits and these other items for our community. But I want to say thank you to everyone. I think our last slide is a mapping. If we could advance, please. And this is a mapping tool. And we mentioned a little bit about how difficult it is to deal with disadvantaged communities and mapping. I want to say that even though we have this community mapping tool, it's still not reflective of the communities we serve. We're going right now through an exercise of census taking, and we do know that some of our DAC mapping tools will only cover the information that's given into a program. Sometimes we don't include tribal lands in terms of our spatial capacity on GIS mapping. So that's something to think about. And other than the other matrix of medium household income, which is also not a 100% tool to determine who is our disadvantaged community, and other mapping programs and tools. So that we're far from having something complete and inclusive, but that's our challenge as state agencies, that we hope to continue to work with our communities to develop better processes to make that determinations. But thank you, Mark and Carmel and my co-panelists.
And thank you, Carmel. Thank you, Anecita, for expanding our knowledge of these situations. Before I go to our final speaker, I'd just like to remind people that if you have a question that you'd like to have us respond to, please type it into the chat. And now our final speaker is Lynn Rodriguez. Take over, Lynn. You're muted.
That's embarrassing. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lynn Rodriguez, and I am the manager of the IRWM program in Ventura County, which is called the Watersheds Coalition of Ventura. If you could advance the slide, Emily. And I'm really excited to be here today. I'm excited about all of the great conversation we've already been having, and the things that I want to present are very consistent with the theme that has been thread throughout the day, which is focusing more on the people side of things and the engagement of our full community spectrum of folks. If you can, one more slide forward. We've heard a lot about IRWM already and in our pre-summit orientation session, and there's been a lot of discussion about, is IRWM something that's focused only on funding and project development, or is it about the people? And I really strongly believe in the work that I do in my region, that it's the people, the relationships, the building the trust, everything that's been already said so well by the previous speakers, that really is the glue that binds us together, and that is what's going to keep us moving strongly forward, even in the absence of, at least for now, any additional grant funding earmarked for IRWM. Next slide. You know, the vision of IRWM from the beginning was really all about collaboration, and it was a new approach to bring stakeholders together at the table, to the process. And as has been said many times today, we've made some great strides in that way, and there are some great efforts going on in our communities to bring people together, but we do have a long way to go. Just a quick highlight of how IRWM works in California. We have 48 IRWM regions that were all formed by those regions as a way to self-determine the size of their region and how they operate. Some regions are multiple counties, like the North Coast, and some regions are very small. My region is one county. And what works best for us and how we address our underserved communities is also really needs to be customized, and everyone's got different issues in their own area. The beauty of IRWM is that it's not siloed in the sense of what we do. It's also not siloed in the sense of who we support. And that has worked really well for some of us. Again, next slide. And again, just to reemphasize, it's not just about funding, but I did want to highlight, because we haven't really gotten into what are some of the types of projects that we've been able to implement with the hundreds of, billions of dollars that we have been spending over the last 16 years in the IRWM program. Next slide. So I just wanted to include just a quick look at some examples of projects that you've been hearing people talk about generally. Next slide. We have groundwater sustainability efforts underway. We have watershed health and enhancement. We have construction of more upgraded facilities for either potable reuse or for recycling or for desalination of seawater. Next slide. And restoring our critical habitat areas through water quality monitoring and development practice changes. And you know, the very important environmental resources that we're all here to help protect, as well as providing more access to not just good water quality and water supply, but also to recreation and the opportunities to be outdoors and recreate near and on water. Next slide. Just a summary of what's really important to know is that we have received a lot of money from the bond funds that started with Prop 50 and then Prop 84 and now Prop 1, 1.445 billion. But the local match is really where all the money has come from. The bulk of the money has come from our local cost share. And going forward, it's going to be really important for us to boost those economic resources, particularly in this challenging time that we're in with the pandemic and other significant challenges to our resources, like the climate change, fire response, and things like that. Can you, next slide, please? So now I just wanted to talk a minute about the collaborative effort that has helped bind the IRWM regions together across the state, and that's the IRWM Roundtable of Regions, which formed in 2006. And we have representatives from almost all the regions participating in our effort. We work together to identify challenges that we all face and how we can work together to address those challenges. Working with the state, we work closely with the state on these grant programs to help advise them on developing guidelines and the solicitation packages, and sharing our challenges and our needs for the programs to be effective for us. We also are working to advocate for the future of IRWM. I think really we all believe that it's been, for the most part, a very successful approach, multi-benefit integrated projects and programs being designed at the local level to address our unique needs in each of our regions. And one of those things is just the fact that our regions are all different sizes and have a completely different makeup of stakeholders. So that's been a really important thing about IRWM that has helped us be successful. We really need to communicate that to our legislators and in our own communities to be sure people understand the values of IRWM if we're going to succeed going forward. So the Roundtable of Regions meets on a regular basis, and we work very closely with each other. We have developed a lot of new initiatives. I'm not going to go into the details on those, but next slide. Some of the things that we've been really focusing on are building capacity among our membership and within our own regions, looking for sources of ongoing funding to provide capacity for those regions that depend on grants or don't have local funding. Continued networking amongst ourselves about how to keep our regional approaches strong across the state, and advocating with legislative folks for future funding. We're able to share information to come together. You can see Anecita up at the front there in that slide. We're collecting people's thoughts at a summit last November and looking ahead to what's working, what's not working, and how do we move forward with IRWM. And of course, collaboration, and a newer aspect of the roundtable is strengthening our underserved communities and tribal communities engagement. And we do have a task force. Next slide. That's a map of all the regions in case you aren't familiar with them. You can get that off of the state's website. Next slide. So what the Roundtable has done is put together a comprehensive website that has information about where the regions are located. You can link to each region's website there. We're going to be adding additional resources about information about each region through these fact sheets that we're developing. Next slide. And we have a disadvantaged community and tribal engagement task force that we've been working on for the last 4 or 5 years, and we are continuing the work of that group and are now looking at how do we address some of the issues about racial equity and enhancing serving our underserved communities, which we also define to include our unhoused people and others, and working with DWR to further define who are we considering to be our underserved communities across the state. We welcome a lot more participation in our roundtable, and you can see on the slide, there's a link to the site. You can reach out to our coordinator, whose name and information is on that website, to add yourself to the list and participate in our meetings. We have a steering committee, a leadership group that addresses the bigger picture issues collaboratively. And then we have a general membership that meets quarterly. All of this now, well, actually, we've always been virtual because it's costly for us to all get together, but we do have in-person summits when that's possible, periodically, once a year or so. There's a lot of other resources about IRWM that you may hear about over the next few days. And we have, I don't know if someone is going to be putting into the chat, the IRWM strategic plan that DWR produced in 2017 that has a lot of other great information about how these programs work at the local level. Next slide. So lastly, I just want to wrap up with what's the future? What is the future for IRWM going forward, given all the challenges that we're facing, and lack of funding resources coming from grant programs is one of the more significant challenges. And you've heard other folks today talk about that. We're very much engaged in this discussion about, how do we sustain this effort that we've created, the human infrastructure, the groups of people meeting together. This is such a vital part of what IRWM is all about. And we don't want to lose that progress, and we don't want to lose that investment of time and effort that we've all put in over these last 15 or more years. So the next steps for the roundtable and how we want to move forward with this is taking stock of how IRWM is working at the local level and we put together an assessment that we're working on. We'll be publishing a report about that later this year. Working together to engage more of the underserved communities and, really continue to build that trust and bring those folks into the regions that are not currently working well. You've heard today, and you're going to hear more in the next couple of days over the workshop, that there's a lot of great engagement happening already in some places, but not in every region. So the Roundtable wants to help regions build that capacity for that engagement. We're working to help on the implementation of the Governor's Water Resilience Portfolio. There's a lot of role in there for IRWM regions and other regional groups to help that happen. We support the state working together with their other partners, other state agencies, to align the programs and regulations that all of us are have to deal with as we implement our IRWM programs, and just continue to build on opportunities for equity. And the last thing I wanted to say is, we really don't have an alternative. We have to work together. If we were to disband the structure that we've created in IRWM, we would have to find something that would continue to serve the role that the IRWM regions serve in protecting our water resources and in engaging everybody at the table. And so all these critical challenges that we face, a lot of them are technological and scientific, but really it's the people. It's all about how the people engage with each other. And I love the quote from Laurel Firestone this morning about we need move at the speed of trust. It's obviously trust that's the vital element of us being able to work together collaboratively as we move forward. And it is tough work. It's challenging work. And I really look forward to continuing to work with partners across the state to make sure that we're successful, because we don't really have an alternative. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And here's a quote that was a quote, a proverb that has been adopted by IRWM that Laurel also mentioned. I just wanted to say that there's a link to the strategic plan that Lynn mentioned in the chat. Now we've been given a 5-minute extension, so we're going to see how many questions we can address. The first one is for Lynn. Why should other regions consider joining the region or the Roundtable of Regions if they haven't already done so?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you. The Roundtable is a great resource for folks that are working to implement their programs. And, it kind of goes back to nobody can do it alone. We all benefit from working together. And the Roundtable has provided a forum for us to share information about what's working and not working in our regions, to have a collective voice at the state level. And it's really important that we have more people, as part of that collective voice, so that we can achieve the goals that we have individually have in our own regions, but also collectively throughout the state. So it's just an incredible resource and opportunity to get to know folks in other regions. Especially these days, we don't have time to travel, go to conferences, network with people. The Roundtable offers that opportunity to build everyone's knowledge, share information, and work together.
Thank you. Anecita and Carmela, in their presentation, they mentioned cultural competency training that's offered to DWR staff. There's a question asking if that's also available to people who do not work at DWR, or whether it could be available.
I'll take that question, and I'd be happy to share that. I've been asked to present to boards and to local organizations. Our training program is about 6 hours. I do over 3 days and do two hours a day, but and it's quite a bit. It goes through the part one is the California history, and it really is a deep dive into that understanding and cultural sensitivity, and then policies, and then tribal engagement and practices and tips to how to do that. Trying to figure out how to kind of compress that and maybe even to a YouTube program for folks. But if someone is very interested, you can connect with me directly. I'll be happy to share, or even to to do some type of compressed version of that for your organization, to tailor it to your organization and to the tribal communities. And I really think the competency part of it is not just hearing from a state agency representative, but also integrating that with your local communities and your tribal communities, because I can tell you that it's all about relationship building. I mean, anything that's going to give us competency in anything is about relationship building. But thank you for that question.
Yeah, you could sum up IRWM as that way, relationship building. And I, for one, would love to take the class. So put me on the list. One more question I think we have time for. A question that came up in a previous session of a mention of tribal land acknowledgement. Has DWR or the IRWM program made any formal statement regarding this practice, and would it be valuable to include this as a requirement in future integrated regional water management plan updates?
If I could start that, I think that is land acknowledgement it's being legislated right now, and it's being legislated for state libraries and the UC systems and other agencies. It has not been further legislated down, so to speak. However, our governor has issued out a very important statement on administration of ancestral land just recently as of Native American Day. It's a brand new policy on ancestral land and access. So that conversation is going to be eventually have to be addressed by our IRWM representatives. But it is something, and Javier mentioned that, and I'm sure we're going to hear from our tribal leaders as well, is that we can't take a policy of land acknowledgement and just say, well, now we've got a policy on that, and we say who we're going to acknowledge, because tribes and other communities, they need more than just an acknowledgement. They want to see reparations. They want to see, community engagement. So I don't know where that is, but I do think keeping that into the front of our conversation, and even thinking about individually as regional representatives, knowing what land, what's the ancestral land, what's the traditional use, is a really important step. And I think that would be more meaningful at the moment with your tribal partners, is even understanding that at the very, very beginning level of that. And then we'll see what is going to be, statutorily defined in what is land management for state agencies.
Thank you. Do we have time for another question?
I would say yes.
One more. Thank you. This question, I'll just read it in the first person, even though it's not from me. The labels priority populations and underestimated populations have recently come to my attention as more humanistic and inclusive alternatives to the disadvantaged community, or DAC, term. I sort of prefer underestimated for its capacity to recognize the tribal ecological knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge of First Nations, and to recognize that has been undervalued and underestimated, but is critical to identifying resilient solutions. Do others have more useful language for capturing the need to explicitly address inequity that's more useful, in other words, as opposed to DAC? That's anyone who'd like to address that?
I'd like to see if Martha, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I think that is it's a very good question. It's totally loaded, and we could have an entire panel on that, Mark. We have about that.
That could definitely be a whole day. So when I have conversations with people in the communities that are labeled disadvantaged communities, there's a clear understanding that while you hold a devastating adjective or something that clearly defines you in a negative tone, that reaps more money. And so maybe we need to describe the region and not the people. And so the people generate dollars, and while we honor humans and human lives and understand that we have to do a reinvestment into human capital, that we look at describing the situation, describing the place, describing what is the issue, and I think giving a face to the people that will generate these dollars. You know, dollars are brought into these communities under the label of $1 million hoods, because there's an acknowledgement that poor people will generate dollars for the jails, for the juvenile halls, all the negatives. And so we need to reinvest our thought about how we see people, and that if we're truly going to take monies to make changes, because they have to, we have to change things. And so we could talk all day about how we need to make changes in our systemic systems, racist systems, and that we acknowledge access and equity is not always favorable to our communities. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to respond to that question? Okay,
Mark, can I just say one thing real quick? I just want to encourage people to work through groups like the IRWM Roundtable of Regions. I know Lynn talked about it earlier. They're making more efforts to have forums for the underrepresented community voices to be heard through that group. And I know both of you as co-chairs are very supportive. I encourage you to get together, the tribes, the stakeholders, all the groups, and try and propose some solutions to this problem, this labeling problem, the problem of definitions that are not inclusionary, and propose those so that future bonds, future legislation policies, or those can reflect your interests. Thanks.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd just like to put in a plug for underserved communities or underrepresented communities. And now I believe I should be turning the controls back over to Anecita. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, panelists. We're going to take a quick, short stretch and refreshment break, but before we turn it into a break time, Emily has a quick recap for our group and some updates.
Excellent. Thank you, Anecita. And thank you to our phenomenal speakers. That was a really excellent panel. And we do have your questions tracked. We will send those questions to our panelists and send that out with our follow-up resources to make sure that we address those. Just one quick reminder as we head into our next session, which will be breakout groups, that for those of you that are joining by phone, we'd like you to merge the audio from your phone with your video so that we can send you collectively off into your breakout group. You can do that by selecting the participant button at the bottom of your Zoom panel, and then click on More, and then Merge with Video and Audio. So we can help you with that via the Zoom chat if you're having any issues. We will be reconvening in 5 minutes. It's a short break, this one, so do a quick stretch, and we will see you back here in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Hi there, everyone. Welcome back from our very quick break. As you are coming back to your computer, you will be receiving a notification to join your assigned breakout group. Please make sure you accept that invitation and enter your breakout. It may take a few seconds to move you from the main screen to the breakout. When you get into the breakout group, you can request assistance by clicking the Ask for Help button. It should be right at the bottom of your screen, and then one of the LGC staff members will be able to jump into your session and help you out. Each group has an assigned facilitator who will guide the discussion, and you will have until 12:55 to discuss with your group before we come back to this full session. And with that, we will send you off into virtual time and space and hope you have a good discussion with your group.